Horror games have come a long way since their inception, evolving from simple text-based adventures to immersive, photorealistic nightmares. Over the decades, developers have experimented with different gameplay mechanics, storytelling techniques, and visual styles to craft experiences that terrify and captivate players. This evolution has been shaped by advances in technology, shifting cultural fears, and innovations in game design. Today we're going to look at the history of horror games, tracing their transformation from early pixelated frights to modern-day cinematic horror experiences. The appeal of horror games lies in their ability to evoke strong emotions, often pushing players beyond their comfort zones. The evolution of horror in gaming has mirrored advancements in gaming hardware and software, allowing for increasingly sophisticated storytelling and immersive gameplay. From the limitations of early hardware to the limitless potential of modern consoles and PCs, horror games have adapted to technological trends while remaining deeply rooted in primal fears. Moreover, horror games have served as a reflection of societal anxieties over time. From supernatural folklore to fears of technological dystopia, the genre has continuously reinvented itself to stay relevant to contemporary audiences. By looking at the progression of horror games, we gain insight into the ways gaming has evolved as an art form while continuing to deliver spine-chilling experiences. Before horror games had graphics, they existed in the form of text-based adventures like Colossal Cave Adventure and Zork. These games used descriptive storytelling to create suspense and fear, forcing players to rely on their imagination. As technology improved, the horror genre began to take shape with early graphical experiences like Haunted House on the Atari 2600, which introduced rudimentary visuals and atmospheric tension. In the 1980s, games like Sweet Home on the Famicom laid the foundation for the survival horror genre. Sweet Home, based on a Japanese horror film, incorporated an eerie atmosphere, limited resources, and puzzle-solving mechanics, elements that would later influence games like Resident Evil. While these early horror games were constrained by hardware limitations, they established fundamental ideas that would define the genre for years to come. Another significant early horror game was The Uninvited, a point-and-click adventure that immersed players in an abandoned mansion filled with supernatural threats. The game demonstrated how text-based narratives could be enhanced with simple visual and audio cues, setting the stage for more interactive horror experiences. Despite their technical limitations, these pioneering horror titles proved that fear could in fact be conveyed effectively through minimal design and storytelling. In the 1990s, we saw the birth of survival horror as we know it, with games like Alone in the Dark being a significant milestone. This game featured 3D character models over pre-rendered backgrounds, pioneered fixed camera angles and tank controls, creating a strange sense of helplessness. Players explored a mansion filled with Lovecraftian horrors, emphasizing limited combat and resource management, two key elements of survival horror. Then came Resident Evil, a game that cemented the genre's identity. Set in the infamous Spencer Mansion, Resident Evil combined cinematic storytelling, inventory management, and fear-inducing enemy encounters to create an unforgettable experience. This franchise success led to games like Silent Hill, which took a more psychological approach, featuring fog-covered streets, unsettling sound design, and deeply disturbing narratives. These games introduced horror elements that preyed on the player's mind, pushing horror storytelling to new heights. The late 90s saw an expansion of horror going into the mainstream. Titles like Dino Crisis applied survival horror mechanics to new settings, proving that horror didn't need to be limited to supernatural threats or big mansions. Meanwhile, the industry began experimenting with blending horror elements into action and adventure titles. This paved the way for future hybrid horror experiences. This groundwork was laid in the decades set the standard for what horror games could achieve in terms of narrative depth and player immersion. As gaming technology advanced, horror games became more immersive and atmospheric. The early 2000s saw a rise in psychological horror, with titles like Fatal Frame, which replaced traditional combat with a camera-based mechanic that forced players to confront ghosts head-on. The sequel to Silent Hill, Silent Hill 2, took horror storytelling to a new level, exploring themes of guilt, loss, and psychological trauma. During this period, horror games also became more cinematic, with improved graphics and voice acting. Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem, introduced sanity effects that blurred the line between player perception and reality, such as fake game crashes and distorted visuals. Meanwhile, Resident Evil 4 reinvented the franchise, replacing slow-paced survival horror with action-oriented gameplay while maintaining an unsettling atmosphere. This shift would influence many future horror titles and lead to a growing debate over action versus horror in gaming. Titles like Fear and Condemned Criminal Origins combined horror elements with first-person shooter mechanics, showing that horror could thrive outside the traditional survival horror format. So what's next for horror video games? As technology advances, horror games are poised to become even more immersive and terrifying. The rise of AI-driven enemy behavior means that horror experiences can adapt in real time, making encounters unpredictable. Photorealistic graphics powered by Unreal Engine 5 will make environments more lifelike, while VR advancements will blur the line between games and reality. Procedural generation could lead to horror games that never play the same way twice, ensuring endless fear. Developers are also exploring new ways to tell horror stories, integrating real-world events and social horror themes to create truly unsettling experiences. As long as players continue to seek out fear-inducing thrills, horror games will continue to evolve, finding new ways to terrify and captivate audiences. Another exciting frontier for horror games is the integration of biometric feedback. Future horror titles could potentially adjust difficulty or intensity based on a player's heart rate, breathing, or other physiological responses. This level of personalization could make horror games more terrifyingly tailored to an individual player, ensuring an experience that is both dynamic and deeply immersive. The potential for innovation in the horror genre is vast. The next decade is sure to bring new nightmares to life. The journey of horror games has been one of constant innovation and reinvention. From the text-based beginnings to the cinematic nightmares of today, the genre has proven its staying power. Whether it's psychological horror, survival horror, or action-infused terror, horror games will always have a place in gaming history. So what do you enjoy most about the horror genre of video games? Let me know down below. Make sure to like, subscribe, and click that bell in case you want more videos like this one, and I'll see you in the next one. I love you. Bye-bye.
Did I jump scare you? Yeah, I bet I did. You coward. You make me sick. Your weakness is pathetic.